Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 20. Conversation between Maitreya and Vidura, verse number 3. Dvaipayanad anvaro mahitve tasya dehajah sarvatmana srita krishnam tatparam syapyanuvritah. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Vidura was born from the body of Vedvyas and was not less than he. Thus he accepted the lotus feet of Krishna wholeheartedly and was attached to his devotees. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The history of Vidura is that he was born of Sudra mother, but his seminal father was Vedvyas. Thus he was not less than Vedvyas in any respect. Since he was born of great father who was supposed to be an incarnation of Narayana and who composed all the Vedic literatures, Vidura was also a great personality. He accepted Krishna as his worshipable Lord and followed his instruction wholeheartedly. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport.
So Vidura, as described here, was not an ordinary personality. Though he was born of a Shudra mother, his father was Vyasadeva, who is considered as the literary incarnation of Narayana. So obviously, a very exalted position Vyasadeva has as a literary incarnation. And being his son is not to be considered as an ordinary person in spite of being born of a Shudra woman. And what is the symptom of such a great personality? The symptom of such a great personality is that he is always attached to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna and also attached to the devotees of the Lord. Not only attached to the lotus feet of the Lord, but is attached to the devotees of the Lord. And he accepted Krishna as worshipable Lord and followed his instruction wholeheartedly. So these are the symptoms of a pure devotee of the Lord. The pure devotee of the Lord his mind is always fixed at he accepted the lotus feet of the Lord wholeheartedly and was attached to his devotees. The sum and bonum of all the instructions that Bhagavad Gita has to give, Bhagavatam has to give, is somehow or the other get attached to the lotus feet of the Lord. But the lotus feet of the Lord is actually the reservoir or is the shelter, reservoir of all protection, all different kinds of love, everything. Just like Krishna has holy name, similarly Krishna's lotus feet is identified by the devotees separately, because they feel that they are not qualified. The idea of a personality begins with respect and then love. The idea of a personality with respect, any personality has a feet, as a lotus feet, as a feet, any personality has a feet. These are very fine concepts. Only in our Vedic culture, in our Indian culture, these things one can get to learn. In animal society, you cannot get to learn. In Western culture, you cannot get. What is the difference between my father's feet and my father's head? But in India, you are taught, in our Vedic culture, you are taught, you go and touch his feet. There is a concept of shelter. There is a concept of protection. There is a concept of surrender when you touch the lotus feet. So in the same way, when you touch the lotus feet of the Lord, there is respect. Before you love someone, you have to respect someone. There cannot be love without respect. So the lotus feet of the Lord indicates, when one surrenders to the lotus feet of the Lord, it indicates respect to that personality. Respect, devotion, surrender to that personality. So when Krishna says, Manmana bhavo madbhakto, always think of me when he says, it means you should think of the lotus feet of the Lord. Because to think of the lotus face of the Lord, it requires you have to first stand on the platform of respect to love someone. You cannot directly jump and love. That is not love. It becomes lust. So when Krishna says, Manmana bhava madbhakto, as devotees we have to practice. Repeatedly it comes in Srimad Bhagavatam, the lotus feet of the Lord, surrendering to the lotus feet of the Lord. You should understand there is significance in that particular manner in which we are asked to surrender to the lotus feet of the Lord. The most precious asset one can possess is the lotus feet of the Lord. Lotus feet of the deities, Nitai Gauranga, deities. As soon as one thinks of the lotus feet of the Lord, one thinks of the personality. Automatic. Shelter-giving personality. Compassionate personality. So there is a great significance to in the continuous instruction that one should become attached to the lotus feet of the Lord. What does attachment means? Here it says he is worshipping the lotus feet of the Lord and attached to the devotees. Attachment develops, or attachment, the meaning of attachment is, one is not complete without being in association of that person. That is called attachment. He feels incomplete. So the lotus feet of the Lord, we should cultivate our consciousness by training our mind to come to the stage where we always feel incomplete if we don't feel, or if we don't think of the lotus feet of the Lord. It's a training. For that you have to have faith. When I combine with something, what happens? Then only you are attached. Just like we are attached to some pleasure, object of pleasure. Why? Because you think when I associate or attach myself with that, it gives me pleasure. Dhyato vishayan pumsan. Then sangat sanjayate kama. The same thing is applicable even in case of any attachment. A transcendental attachment also. Here in the material world we are attached to Vishaya because it gives me sense gratification. The spiritual world, you are attached to Krishna, you are attached to devotees of the Lord because there it provides that everything that you need, spiritually need. Here you get attached because you attached to sense objects because the sense objects provides what your body needs, what your body and the mind needs. So in the spiritual world also there is attachment. Attachment comes from the belief or the faith that I or my needs, everything is complete only in association with the shelter of Krishna, with the shelter of the devotees. So this kind of thinking can never come in a person who is thinking that I am self-sufficient, I am independent, I am complete. The material world, when we fall down, this is what we feel. We count all the things that we have karmically acquired, all our possessions, and feel a sense of proprietorship. And out of sense of proprietorship, we feel attached. In the material world, we don't feel attached due to sense of proprietorship. The material world, it is through proprietorship we feel attached to everything. In the spiritual world, we feel attached to everything not to sense of proprietorship, but the sense of respect and love and faith. And there is no difference between the lotus feet of the Lord, there is no difference between the Lord, there is no difference between His holy name, there is no difference between any of His paraphernalia, His pure devotees. Once we get attached to any one of them or many of them, immediately there is reciprocation. It is not simply some mental picture, lotus feet of the Lord. The lotus feet of the Lord, if one gets attached to, it's getting attached to Krishna Himself. There is no difference between the Lord's lotus feet and the Lord. So there is continuous repetition everywhere. And because it is coming many, many times attached to the lotus feet of the Lord, worshipping the lotus feet of the Lord, it's too often mentioned. One should not underestimate, or one should not think, or one should not ignore the significance of specifically meditating on the lotus feet of spiritual master, lotus feet of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, lotus feet of Krishna, lotus feet of Srimati Radharani. If we attach to the lotus feet of Radharani, all lust will go. All lust will go. Because lotus feet, you have to have, if you are attached, the only way you can get attached is by great respect. To see the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His eternal consort, their lotus feet with respect, that automatically purifies all our misperceptions of all kinds of misperceptions about males and female in this material world. So just like we are always chanting the holy name of the Lord, we are asked to take shelter of the holy name of the Lord. We should also develop attachment to the lotus feet of the Lord. And the lotus feet of the Lord is so easily available for us. Because the Lord has incarnated as Archa Vigraha, and as Archa, His lotus feet is there. The lotus feet of the deity is non-different from the absolute lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. This is such a great facility, is it not? Simply we have to look at the lotus feet of the Lord. It is tantamount to looking at the absolute lotus feet of the Lord. It is an incarnation for our perception, for our contact. So simply worshipping the lotus feet of the Lord, that this is a treasure of everything. Just like the holy name is the ocean of Satchidananda, the lotus feet of the Lord is ocean of Satchidananda. In that perspective, we should learn how to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. So real meditation, real personalism begins by surrendering to the lotus feet of the Lord, then other kinds of things. So what is the result of taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord? Vidura, Prabhupada says that he is completely, wholeheartedly engaged in the service of the Lord, wholeheartedly following the instructions of Lord Krishna. So following the instruction, when you surrender to someone, then the obvious thing is that you surrender to his mind. If you surrender to Krishna, means you have to surrender to the lotus feet of the Lord, means you have to surrender to his mind. And his mind is revealed in Bhagavad Gita, his mind is revealed by the acharyas. So meditating on the lotus feet automatically is followed by executing the instructions of the Supreme Lord, which is amply available in the Bhagavad Gita. So this is a training of Bhakti Yoga. Contrary to so many other things our mind wants to meditate upon, our mind wants to take shelter of so many things, depending on so many. In our mind we depend on so many things. We have to throw all those dependencies. Because conditionally we depend on, something good comes, then okay, now I am safe. Some money comes, you say, I am safe. Or some good contact comes, you say, I am safe. I am better off, I am better off. Nothing will make us better off other than feeling that the Lord is with us. The Lord is with us. And feeling that the lotus feet of the Lord, having full faith that the lotus feet of the Lord will give me full protection. Full protection. These are simple things. Bhakti Yoga is actually very, very simple. It doesn't need very big analysis and all those things. Just very simple knowledge. And this is very easily observable for those who have come in a, kind of a Vedic culture. Even today, in spite of all our traditional practices, all these things are dying out. Still, because of this great Indian culture, Vedic culture, everything cannot be wiped out. The things are there. People, devotees, the family system, the culture in the family, everything is continuously it is there. Very difficult to wipe out. So for those who have this from childhood, they have this feeling towards touching the feet of the father, touching the feet of the mother, touching the feet of the elders. Automatically, why you are touching? Why don't you touch his hand? Why you touch his feet? Its culture is developed to touch his feet. Because it has absolute significance. It is coming from ultimate lotus feet of the Lord being the shelter. Because Krishna consciousness is highest cultured life. Highest civilized and cultured life. Spiritual world, life in the spiritual world is highest cultured and, fine kind of life. Fine life is there in the spiritual world. So Vedic culture means it's finer and finer and finer. So we learn all these things. Or even within the family system in our Vedic culture. So everybody is, feeling as one, as family, attachment. Even though that attachment ultimately when it comes to spiritual life, we say you should detach from everything. But you learn lot of things in the process of growing up in a family. Imagine this world was without a family system. Family system all broken down. Then very difficult to become Krishna conscious. One may wonder that, oh no, we say we should all get detached from, all bodily connections, we should get detached, then only spiritual advancement is possible. Then one may say, oh, if you find a world where actually there is no bodily connection, there is no attachment between father, son, children, husband, wife, that will be the ideal for Krishna consciousness. Will it be? It will not. You need to be in a society, because you learn so many things, because spiritual life means attachment, positive attachment, not a vagabond. Yeah, positive attachments are there. So at least to know what is this rasa of attachment and all these things, this family life is very precious. Family system is very precious. That is where we learn so many things. And then we transform those values, replaced by Krishna. So that way, even now there is kind of coherence of families in India compared to the West. And now it's last 2-3 decades, it's geometrically decreasing. The divorce rates were, which was unbelievable that India would have, is having now. Hardly anything. Now, my younger days, it was like 8%, 9% divorce rates. And then I remember reading the newspaper in those days, 1985-86, India's was 8% and America was 45% divorce rates. And now I think America will be almost close to 90 divorce rates. And surprisingly in India, their divorce rates have again gone up to nearly more than 50%. Very fast we are on the footsteps of the West. So when there is no values in life, family system will break. When there is no higher cultured values, cultured life. See, there are 4 lakh species of human life are there out of 84 lakh species. These 4 lakh species are different levels of fineness in culture. Closer and closer to spiritual culture of the spiritual world. So more you become like animal, sense gratification is the goal of life. That means your consciousness is pulled down to animal life. In animal life, you don't see this kind of family coherence, isn't it? None. Then it should be very easy to preach to animals. In animal society, they are not attached at all. They are just freely walking around. But of course, they don't have intelligence. They've gone down to that level. Because you need vocabulary of fine interpersonal relationship, respect for mother, respect for father, respect for husband, loyalty in relationship, chastity, all these things. If you don't have vocabulary, what we will understand? Bhagavatam cannot understand. Where do you pick this up? That is why it said human form of life is so precious, and being born as a human being in this country is even more precious for becoming a devotee of the Lord. Simply being born is no precious, is useless. If you become Krishna conscious, if somehow you come across Prabhupada, a pure devotee, then all these things will matter. All these things will matter. Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada says, it's a cultural consciousness. It is about culturing Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness you culture. Because culture means it's personal. Krishna is a person, eternal person. I am an eternal person. We are all eternal persons. And eternal persons live in an eternal society. That eternal society is Vaikuntha Loka. So we are eternally a social being. In the material world, we are a material social being. In the spiritual world, we are a spiritual social being. The spiritual social being means spiritual culture, spiritual sensitivities, all these things. And where do you learn that? Material world. When you are born as a human form, in a good family, you learn all these sensitivities. So that very easily you replace everything and keep Krishna in the center and develop the relationship with Krishna, sensitive relationship with Krishna, starting with respect for his lotus feet. Any questions? जय ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, जगत गुरु श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय.